Imagine spending 27 years in solitary confinement, not days, not months, 27 years in a cell the size of a parking space, with almost zero human contact. When Robert King was finally released, neurologists discovered something that genuinely disturbed them. The part of his brain responsible for spatial awareness had begun to deteriorate. Not from a disease, not from a physical injury, from loneliness, from the simple, devastating absence of other human beings. And here's what should keep you up tonight. You don't need solitary confinement for this to happen to you. Welcome to MindAtlas. And today, we're going down a rabbit hole that most people aren't ready for. Loneliness is often described as a feeling, a temporary emotional state, something you shake off after a good weekend with friends. But neuroscientists have spent decades quietly uncovering a truth that the mainstream conversation almost never touches. Loneliness doesn't just affect how you feel. It physically rewires your brain. It changes its structure, its chemistry, its fundamental ability to process reality, and in some cases, the damage is permanent. Let's start with the number that stopped researchers cold. A 2023 meta-analysis pulling from data across multiple countries found that chronic loneliness is associated with a 26% increase in the risk of premature death. Not depression, death. We're talking mortality rates comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, comparable to obesity. The former Surgeon General of the United States called it an epidemic. But even that framing doesn't capture what's happening at the neurological level, because what's happening is far darker than a public health statistic. When your brain perceives loneliness, and notice the word perceive, because the brain doesn't always require reality to be true to react as if it is, it triggers a threat response. The same ancient alarm system that lit up when your ancestors were separated from their tribe on the open savanna millions of years ago. Being alone in the prehistoric world wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a death sentence. Predators, starvation, no protection. Your brain evolved to treat social isolation as a mortal emergency. The problem is that same emergency response is still running inside your skull in the 21st century, and it doesn't know the difference between a dangerous cliff and a quiet apartment. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. When chronic loneliness activates that threat system repeatedly, the brain begins to physically rewire itself toward paranoia. Neuroscientists at the University of Chicago found that lonely individuals show heightened activity in the ventral striatum when viewing threatening social images compared to non-lonely individuals. Their brains were scanning the environment more aggressively for danger, but more disturbing than that, their brains had simultaneously become worse at processing positive social cues. Loneliness doesn't just make you feel more afraid. It biologically programs you to see threats that aren't there while becoming blind to connection that is. Think about what that means in practice. You become lonely. Your brain enters threat mode. You start interpreting neutral interactions as hostile. The person who didn't text back becomes evidence of rejection. The colleague who seemed distracted becomes proof you're disliked. You pull back from social situations because your brain has decided they're dangerous. And in pulling back, you become lonelier. The neurological trap closes around you, and it is almost mechanically precise in how it operates. But the rewiring goes deeper still. Let's talk about the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped structure in the center of your brain is critical for memory formation and spatial navigation. It is also one of the most stress-sensitive regions in the entire central nervous system. And research on both isolated humans and animals has shown that prolonged loneliness causes measurable hippocampal shrinkage. The neurons don't just stop firing properly, they begin to die. You lose gray matter volume in a region fundamental to learning, to memory, to your very sense of orientation in the world. And this isn't theoretical science buried in obscure journals. Researchers at MIT found a cluster of neurons in the dorsal raphe nucleus, a region deep in the brainstem that they described as a loneliness circuit. When activated by isolation, these neurons create a craving sensation almost indistinguishable from hunger. Your brain manufactures a biological need for social connection as urgent and as physical as the need for food. The difference is, you can always eat. Connection is far harder to find. Now consider what happens when that craving goes unfulfilled for months or years. The brain's default mode network, the system that activates when you're not focused on a task, the network responsible for self-reflection and imagining other minds, it begins to hyperactivate. You spend more time in your own head. You simulate conversations that aren't happening. You replay past interactions, often distorting them negatively. You begin to lose the ability to accurately model what other people are thinking and feeling, which is one of the most chilling developments in the entire picture, because the skill of understanding other humans is quite literally use it or lose it. Isolation erodes the neurological infrastructure of empathy. There is research from the European Space Agency involving simulated long-duration space missions where participants lived in isolated habitat environments for months. The cognitive decline was measurable and consistent. Reaction times slowed. Decision-making quality dropped. Emotional regulation became harder, but the finding that haunted the researchers was the shrinkage in white matter connectivity between prefrontal regions, the part of the brain that makes you human, that gives you impulse control, rational thought, the capacity to imagine futures and consequences, was being physically degraded, not from disease, from the absence of people. And here's something almost no one talks about. The immune system is listening to all of this. Loneliness triggers a genetic expression pattern that researchers call the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. What that means in plain language is that chronic loneliness causes your body to upregulate inflammatory genes while downregulating antiviral genes. Your biology essentially prepares for wounds and attack because that's what isolation historically meant. But in doing so, it leaves you systematically more vulnerable to viruses, to cancer, to cardiovascular disease, while simultaneously flooding your system with chronic inflammation that attacks your own tissues. Your brain and your immune system are in a feedback loop of destruction, and loneliness is pulling both levers at once. What makes all of this so terrifying isn't the extreme cases, it's the ordinary ones. It's the fact that surveys consistently find between 30 and 50% of adults in developed nations report meaningful levels of chronic loneliness. It's the middle-aged professional who has hundreds of social media connections and nobody to call at midnight when things fall apart. It's the elderly widow whose hippocampus is quietly shrinking in an apartment nobody visits. It's the college student surrounded by a campus of thousands who feels invisible in every room. These aren't edge cases. These are the neurons quietly rewiring right now in hundreds of millions of brains. And perhaps the most disturbing twist in all of this is what researchers call the loneliness paradox. As the brain becomes more chronically lonely, it becomes neurologically less capable of escaping loneliness. The threat response makes social interaction feel dangerous. The degraded empathy circuits make connection harder to form. The hyperactive default mode network traps you in rumination. The very damage loneliness causes makes you worse at fixing it. The brain begins to actively resist the cure for its own disease. There is some light in the data. Neuroplasticity is real. The brain can rebuild. Consistent quality social connection can restore default mode network balance. Hippocampal volume can recover with the right interventions. The loneliness circuit neurons can be quieted, but the window matters, the depth matters, and casual digital interaction, the kind we've largely substituted for genuine human presence, does not appear to satisfy the biological circuit. The dorsal raphe nucleus doesn't respond to 100 likes. It responds to being truly known by another conscious mind. The science is telling us something ancient and urgent underneath all its clinical language. We are a species that was never designed to be alone. Not psychologically, not neurologically, not biologically. And the modern world has quietly built an architecture of isolation so normalized, so comfortable looking on the surface that millions of people are experiencing a neurological emergency they don't even have language for. They just feel vaguely wrong, vaguely empty. Vaguely like something essential has gone dark somewhere inside them, because something has. If this video made you think differently about something you thought you already understood, that's exactly what MindAtlas exists to do. We go beneath the surface of the human mind into the places most channels won't follow. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because the next video might be the one that changes how you see everything. We'll see you in the dark.